My great-grandfather was a farmer, and my dad was a farmer, so there's several generations. It doesn't get any better than that.
So the way that people used to till was by moldboard plow. And effectively, you are inverting the soil. It's very aggressive tillage.
That's what got me into soil conservation, because in bad rains, we had severe erosion on this hilly land. But it was pretty much the same farming practices that was done all over.
And if done at the wrong time, say before a big rain event, which back then you didn't have a weather forecast, you can lose a lot of soil by erosion. Now today we have, enabled by technology, incredible abilities to be precise in how we till, when we till, and to do it in a way that doesn't drag yield, doesn't hurt yield, but we can preserve soils. So things like strip tillage or reduced tillage, or even just no tillage.
And yes, as far as I know, I was the second guy to try plant corn zero-till in Bureau County. At least that was what the soil conservationist said. And the second guy to try to no-till soybeans. And I had no idea if it was going to work or not.
I think people thought he was crazy because that's just not the way things were done. I mean, it used to be when he was my age, if you saw one stalk standing out in the field, like you had done a terrible job plowing. I mean, you wanted to see everything completely black. That's just the way that things were done. He was trying to no-till with conventional till equipment. I got to watch all that and be in the middle of that. And the thing that strikes me to this day looking back is we'd be zero-tilling some beans and a neighbor or whatever would show up, and they always did the same thing. They walked out in the field, they looked at the ground, they kicked around for a while, and as they were walking away, they went and walked back to their truck. And you began to see they didn't think this was going to work, but my father believed it would, and it did. It was really difficult to implement to begin with because you didn't have the right tools. Now I'll jump ahead then to what we do today. Same thing with the strip till. I started out with a homemade 8-row bar that my brother-in-law had made so I could do strips, no guidance, and it was ugly at best, but it was the best we had. And it was inexpensive at the time. In fact, I bought 8 used coulters to do it with to see if it would work.
Farmers are kind of used to use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And if you have to do that, you do it. You just do what you have to do.
We've made great strides. Conservation tillage, I think, exemplifies how the Illinois farmer has rapidly adopted a technique that conserves soil and allows for profitable farming. In the 1980s, we realized as a country that we were hemorrhaging soil. And this state led the way in terms of the adoption of reduced tillage or strip tillage, etc. That makes me very optimistic that we'll meet these challenges of the future, including nutrient loss reductions.
2016 was really the year that I remember of really ramping up on the nutrient loss stuff. So we kind of started this stewardship group here in Bureau County with a group of farmers, and that was actually the summer that the Illinois Farm Bureau took a trip out to Iowa, and I got to go on that trip.
So I met Michael Ganschow when he came to Iowa on our bus trip, and so I would sit next to Michael and just ask him, what do you do? Do you spend a lot of time with your county farm bureau? Do you know Evan Holteen, your president?
That trip was probably geared towards more people that were heavily involved in the Farm Bureau, people that they knew, and at that time I wasn't at all. I wasn't even very active in our local Farm Bureau.
I learned, on the bus trip about the way that his grandpa thought about conservation and his dad thought about conservation and why he was part of this local group. And so this is his fault because what happened was he told me too much. And then I said, well, have you ever thought about becoming more involved in your county Farm Bureau?
Being a young kid at that time, not being very involved, you kind of think, what is the Farm Bureau really doing for us? What is the real purpose of it? So I go on this Iowa nutrient trip, and I see all the things that we're doing and the people we're talking to. I don't know how we would do this job without them anymore. I mean, they are vital to our success out here in the countryside day in and day out because of the advocates that they have out there for agriculture right now. Not just advocating for agriculture, but also advocating to the public as, in a sense of nutrient loss. Farmers can help be the answer to the problem. And I think giving that education is a huge part of
what the Illinois Farm Bureau is doing for us.
We have a lot of county farm bureaus, and we wanted to be able to serve them and help bring their ideas to reality. So what we started was a grant program to our county farm bureaus called the Nutrient Stewardship Grant Program. Our county farm bureaus, their farmer leaders at the county level can come up with an idea and ask us for the support back in governmental affairs, and we will bring it to fruition. So 100 projects with 70 county farm bureaus since we started in 2015. And so we started building a component into some of the programs with the county farm bureaus of a field day.
Does anybody need to go to the restroom further? Oh, I'm sorry, it's just a habit. I do that with my kids, so. We're going to a field day in Watauga to look at cover crops today, or what the benefits are of farmers utilizing cover crops in their farms. You know, you can utilize a cover crop to help nutrient loss, and you can utilize a cover crop to harvest carbon, I would say. One of the biggest purposes of these field days is to kind of showcase some of the practices that farmers are utilizing to help prevent nutrient loss, and also to educate other farmers that may not be using these practices, you know, what they can do and maybe how to best use them to apply those practices on their own farms. You know, sometimes they just don't know where to start, and I think this is a good showcase of maybe where a starting point can be and maybe how to best manage those practices. Yeah, because of the weather last night and it being so rainy, they're actually going to be moving the field day to the firehouse just because it's probably too sloppy to be out there with a bunch of people and get vehicles in and whatnot. Maybe we'll go through the door.
Young Farmers is a branch of the Young Leaders program at Illinois Farm Bureau, and it's members that are 18 to 35 years old. So a 2-hour conversation about all the things they could do turned into this cover crop project. And that was because a lot of my young farmers are coming back home to farm, or they're just getting out of college and they're coming back, and they've learned all this stuff at college. They've learned all these nutrient stewardship programs or ideas or things that are going on, but how do they come home and get their family members to adapt to the new programs, which is nothing wrong. Change is hard, adding inputs to the farm is hard. And so what was a way that we could do that to help those young farmers get that information and try that new practice and get their families on board?
Triticale has a better feed value than rye does. We've only taken one analysis so far. And the year that we did, it was a wet year, so.
Isn't that always the case, though? You know?
Get chopped on time.
Yeah.
So what is a cover crop, first of all? A cover crop just refers to a crop that one plants, which is typically in the fall season for the Midwest, but you don't harvest it. And as the name implies, you're covering the soil.
The benefit of doing that is the cover crop actually can take the excess of nutrient that haven't been used, left on the ground. Before the spring, you chemically terminate that, so they stay on the ground as the residual and then slowly decompose and return their nutrient back. By doing so, much less excess of nutrients in the soil will be leached, loosed to the water body. Cover crop also have some other benefits. For example, people talk about cover crop can increase soil organic carbon. Cover crop can actually improve soil health and then increase the soil water holding capacity, and then so there are some other different aspects, and also suppress weed too.
We're going to continue to use the data that we already have and compile it with data that we're going to get in the future, and we're going to have future field days that will dig in deeper to what we're finding on the not so much the agronomic side, but field health, soil health, what we're finding on each individual plot that we have.
My goal, I feel like, as a manager on the project has always been, especially with the Nutrient Stewardship Grant, is to go to Lauren Lurkins and say, hey, what do you need from us? Like, what do you need us to do and prove and show that you can then go to take to stakeholders or politicians or anybody that doesn't believe that Illinois Farm Bureau and farmers are taking that step to be stewards of the land. So we had 18 of our 20 townships covered, and so you have to think having those 18 out of 20 townships shows through the panel, through all the participants being there, it was their chance to not only like talk with each other about what they had done and what they had found and different ways they could do things, but it was a way just to show that Knox County is willing to take that extra step.
I had the ability to sit down with some of these growers that, you know, they really want to try to do some of this stuff, but, you know, this isn't a cookie cutter approach. There's not one size of doing this practice that fits every single farm.
20-acre plot this year. We put in an additional 40 acres next to our farm, trying to find ways to add some feed value for our cattle. We have been implementing no-till and cover crops here in the last, 10 years. We feel at this point we just need to see what works and what doesn't work. This is great that it's, we can figure out what's working on our farm. We also can talk to our neighbors that are also doing the plots and see what's working on their farm. I've had some landlords from other states that have seen this and asking a lot of questions and are very intrigued, and I think that is very important to see that other people from around the states are seeing what we are doing here in our little county of Knox County.
I think through the cover crop project or different efforts that Illinois Farm Bureau does, it shows, and I hope it shows, the common consumer and everyday person that farmers do care about their land, because that's their livelihood. That's what they need to be the best that it can be for them to make the best crop to feed America.
The decision of what cover crop species a farmer uses depends on the goal and on their context.
If you're looking for something that's going to maintain cover up until you plant, you could be looking at, even like a hairy vetch or a cereal rye or an annual rye, or there's a dozen or more different combinations and varieties that you can go with basically on what you want to accomplish or how you're going to do it. If you're seeding this, before you harvest a crop, you might seed a different cover crop because you don't want to get the accelerated growth that something like cereal rye might have. So it really comes down to what are your goals and how you're trying to manage it.
A lot of the practices that we know that can be good environmentally speaking, like say cover crops, they introduce a lot of risks. And if things go wrong, and they can go wrong sometimes with say cover crops, there's a reality of a big financial loss for the farmer.
Actually, a couple years ago, I think it was 2017, we had been playing around with cover crops. What we faced was something that none of us anticipated around here, never even saw. We had armyworms, and we had armyworms so bad that they were literally, it looked like the road ditches were being mowed off, and you could see them crossing the road to get to the next road ditch because they were just looking for anything that was green. So at that time, when they were moving, we had terminated our cover crop, right? So what were they eating? They were eating our crop that was out in the field too. That was one of those points where I was just like, okay, is this really worth it now? Because I'm trying to do something positive to prevent nutrient loss and build soil and all this other stuff, but if I hadn't had this cover crop, I wouldn't have this armyworm problem that I'm dealing with. We don't usually let our cover crop get that growthy either. That's why I seed it late and I terminate it probably earlier than most people do around here. The other thing that you could think about doing if you wanted to let it get bigger, obviously, and get more growth, is to come in with an insecticide when you're doing a herbicide pest to maybe try to control the insects. But I try not to apply any more insecticides than I have to, because you got to remember, when you're killing the bad insects, you're also killing the good.
In terms of cover crop implementation, given all these risks, you don't want to go in typically all in on 1,000 acres with covers. It takes some practice.
If you want to start cover crops and on your farm, you can't just go pick up a book that has trial and errors from someone else on it. It's not there yet. Always a mind game and gambling for farmers.
You just gotta make the best decision with the information you have and go forward, and that's really all you can do at times.
You don't hear that story. And I think people sometimes think farmers are, for fun throwing on more fertilizer or not cover cropping, when the reality is that fertilizer is an insurance policy to ensure a good yield. Scientifically, farmers, they know their land very well. They may not be scientists, but they're empiricists. They're dealing with data, with observations all the time.
But to me, I think, no matter what the data ends up saying, I think it's a bigger story of how farmers think about innovating, you know, and how our organization, even at the county level or the state level, can be there to kind of fill those gaps that they need when we're tackling these huge environmental issues.
Did you get that on film?
Yeah, I actually did.